All right. In this case, it's just a plain Jane piece of maple. It doesn't have any character or color. Go back to this camera. Doesn't have any character or color or anything in it, but it does have grain, and the grain is running parallel to the bed of the lathe. It does have grain running in it. So what I did after I started to rough it out and got the four corners squared off a little bit, I found the center point where I was at, and I drew a line on that annual ring all the way down here, all the way across here, and down to the other end, and I put my center point on that annual ring. So now I've got my two center points on the same annual ring of the tree. Now, why is that important? It can be important for a lot of things, but in a lidded box like this, where I'm trying to camouflage the fact that it is a box, I want that grain to be perfectly matching and parallel to each other. It's important too if you're doing something like a goblet, where you want that grain to be perfectly running. I want the grain to be running perfectly straight up the stem of a goblet. If it's on a diagonal, it's going to weaken it. And when it's perfectly straight, the grain character flows in from the foot and any of the details that you might use in a balanced character, because the grain's running nice and straight through there. So let me go to my drawing board here and talk about why it's important for a box. We've got a blank of wood here, and the grain is running nice and parallel, right? Now we separate that with did I do that right? Yeah, I guess. Now we separate that with our kerf and our tenon and mortise. Now, when we put that back together, that grain has to touch that grain when we close the box back up, right? You want this and this to match when we close that back up, okay? Now, let's do it a random way with the grain going this way, right? And we do that same kerf. We take a kerf out of here again. Now, this grain is not going to match up when it gets over here, okay? So one of the ways to try to get them to match up better, to hide the fact that it's a box, is to make the grain perfect. How are we going to make the grain perfect? We have to do that when we're roughing out, before we get it on the faceplate, before we make our chuck tenon and everything else. While we're between centers, we have to make this as a goal and do it.